The story I've been telling so far has led us to the point where we came up with an alternative way of understanding what logical propositions are. And we started with the idea that logical propositions are truth values that we assign to statements, to predicates. And so we kind of very roughly looked at an alternative way of looking at it, where uh, where propositions can be thought of as sets. So and where logic in effect operates on cuts of the world, where you're cutting the world into the set of things of which some statement is true, and that cut of which that statement is false. That's a bit of a different way of approaching it. And I, I sort of roughly claimed that essentially the idea was that by thinking of logic in that way, maybe we can put logic on a firm, or maybe we can put mathematics on a firm footing. And just to understand why this might have been a desirable thing, and why people wanted this to happen. Um, I thought maybe we'll just jump back a little bit and just look a bit back of the history of the Enlightenment. Um, and again, this is just going to be a very rough sort of overview of these things, just off the top of my head, kind of stuff. But essentially, we have to go back to Descartes and to Newton, um, and I mean, Descartes is famous for his statement "cogito ergo sum," um, which basically means I think, therefore I am, um, which was basically a way to escape from the whole skepticism of, well, the sort of methodological skepticism where you can't be sure of anything at all. And what he was saying, well, there's one thing you can be sure of, and that is that you are thinking, because you can't be mistaken in thinking you're thinking. So this is quite of an interesting way of actually weaponizing the opposite way of doing the ad absurdum argument, because essentially what he's saying is that if you think that you're not thinking, that's absurd. Because it would be absurd to think that you're not thinking, um, it follows that you must be thinking. Um, so essentially, well, I'm maybe putting that a little bit a little bit too loosely, but essentially, essentially, if you start with the proposition that you can't be sure of anything, you end up with the claim that you can't be sure that you're thinking. But that claim that you can't be sure what you're thinking is a thought. And because you can't both be thinking, you can't therefore be correct when you're thinking that you're not thinking. So essentially, that's kind of where the absurdity comes in. So your original claim that you can't be sure of anything must be incorrect. So there is something you can be sure of, um, and that thing would be that if you just look at the structure of that argument, essentially, what you must be sure of is that, well, that you must be thinking. Even if you're thinking you're not thinking, you must be wrong in thinking that you're not thinking. So that's kind of how Descartes sets it up. But the other thing that Descartes is famous for, is sort of the whole idea of the Cartesian plane. So like a lot of philosophers, I mean, it's often claimed that philosophy has no kind of useful applications. But if you look at the history of especially Enlightenment philosophy, but even before then, philosophy has always been tied to mathematics. A lot of famous philosophers started out as mathematicians, or had some connection to mathematics at some point in their lives. Um, um, there are a few sort of that didn't have that connection, but maybe it's just my bias that I'm sort of looking more at the mathematical philosophers. But in general, one finds that there's usually some sort of scientific or mathematical connection to philosophy. And so really, I mean, everything that we've built in the Enlightenment is built on thinking about what numbers mean and how to do science. So it's not an abstract thing at all. In fact, it is very, very direct consequences. A lot of discoveries that we've made in science were made on the back of philosophizing about what mathematics means. And so that's where Descartes being a mathematician is so important, because at the time there wasn't really this huge distinction between philosophy and science and mathematics and music and all of these things being separate things. It wasn't just conceived that way. A scientist was a natural philosopher, a person who philosophizes about nature. That was sort of the thing. So really, this distinction, this siloing of different disciplines, is really something that started happening in the 19th century. And of course, the 19th century is associated with the Industrial Revolution. So really, it's the industrialization of knowledge. And if we go back, why would you want to industrialize knowledge like that? Why would you think it's a useful thing to do? Well, if you go back to Adam Smith and some of the logic of industrialization, one of the main concepts that drives industrialization is the concept that if you're a button maker, and I think Smith actually uses the example of a button maker, if you well, let's say you're a coat maker, and you do every step in succession. So you sew the shirt. I don't know how to make coats. So if you sew your shirt, and then you cast the button, and then you cut the sleeves, or whatever you do when you're making a coat. Each little step involves you stopping your action and starting a new action, and every little individual action needs mastery on its own. It might take you years to learn how to do each individual step, and after years and years and years, you master this whole combined skill of making a coat. And so basically what Smith said, well, no, it's much faster if you just, the only thing you do in the whole day is you just make buttons, and you just get really, really quick and really good at making buttons. So you have one person who's really, really quick at making buttons, one person who makes the sleeves. All that they do all day, they just snip sleeves. That's all they do. And that's really the logic of industrialization. And that's why you can mechanize that so well, because you take a problem, you break it into its constituent elements, and you line those constituent elements up, like eventually Ford would do with the production line. And that allows you to do these things really, really quickly. And so in the 19th century, and now I'm going to butcher French as well, among all the other languages I'm butchering, but Auguste Comte essentially came up with this idea of sciences being in this hierarchy, and each having their distinct thing. And interesting, Comte actually put sociology at the top of the sort of the most important science, if one wants to do the overarching science, which is not exactly how one would see it today. But we'll come back to that again eventually. So it's just important to see why it was kind of thought that it wasn't a desirable thing to turn logic to turn mathematics into logic, because if you could do that, then that thing that philosophers did, which was do mathematics, could be mechanized and automated, and all this wonderful stuff that you get out of mathematics you could get for free. Essentially, you could and remember Babbage and all of these people were making computational engines, some of these early computers, and of course Peirce was thinking about some of the whole idea of logical operators and stuff. So all of this stuff was coming together with the idea that, well, if we can separate out mathematics and make it like a machine, like an industrial tool, that you plug in your problem and you crank the handle and out pops your solution, and great, you got it. If mathematics was logical in that sense, well, you could do that, and that would be great. So we're gonna have a look at some other stabs at this problem, and see where we end up with it. But that's just a little bit of the background in the history of why this was thought to be a good thing, and why this was so important, and eventually why we are now stuck in this place where we're kind of caught in between two worlds of this sort of post-industrial era, not quite realizing how much of what we do is based on an industrial logic that may not be exactly the most appropriate way to go about things in the present. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there for tonight. Yeah, have a good one. Cheers.